Okay, our panellists. I've got questions here, but I don't really want to do that. I want to go straight to the floor if I can get any hands. Anyone brave enough to throw? Right, Ruth, we've got one over here. Thank you very much. Is a mic coming? Yes, it's on its way.
Hi, I just wanted to ask the panel, and maybe if I just start off by saying that I've got one of these fantastic Surface Pros and I love it, and it's got my whole life on it. I showed it to my 19-year-old son and he said, "Wow, Mum, have you gone to work for Google?" So I thought if I could impress him about technology, I was doing pretty well. But the question I wanted to ask about is, it's fantastic, I think, to have that flexibility and portability and to be able to work anywhere, but the potential downside of it is that work life tends to sort of bleed into home life, and I find myself checking my email, in the queue for the checkout at Woolies and wherever I am, because I take it with me. So I just wonder if the panel could comment on, I suppose the boundaries around the sort of flexibility or possibly some of the negative consequences of flexibility.
Pick me.
Emma wants to have a go.
The only reason I want to have a go is because I've actually been, most of my career, apart from the last sort of 5 or 6 years, has been actually doing that. I think we mustn't forget the important aspect of, when I talk about sort of flexibility, it's about work-life balance, what it is for you. And the issue here is that I had to do probably a lot more work when I was working the 2 days a week at a university, where in fact I was squeezing in almost 4 days, 5 days of work in those couple of days. And I think there's got to be a lot of development of not only leaders to be really clear about my expectations of a person that I'm paying 2 days a week. So in fact for me it was unpaid labour. And I think unless you've got the power to actually control that, it is development and leadership skills you have to develop of the leaders to make sure that you're telling people, well, I saw you online, you're not working, you need to stop doing that. Now, if you've had a discussion and people are comfortable with that, that's fine. But often what they'll do is model themselves on what they see, and that's the bit I kick myself around now, and that is, you'll be there late, you'll be there early, you can say to people, go home, it's fine, I support it. Well, not if you want to be at a senior level. So I think there's a very significant discussion here to be had around leaders' role in actually making sure that that's covered, and your personal reconciliation of what it is that you want in your life and what the balance is, including some level of mindfulness that you can't be on that computer email all the time, and you can't while you're driving because you'll get fined. So that's great. I don't do it anymore.
Anyone else want to comment? You're all leaders. How do you role model?
If I can just comment in relation to what Irma just said, it's fine to introduce the initiative, but you need to make sure that the framework that sits behind that is set up. So policies and procedures, they need to be there. And those expectations from your staff, when you can access emails and when you can't. Communication, you need to look at your communication strategy. There's a number of issues which they don't all come to mind at the moment, but you need to address them before you implement flexible working.
And Eva, you'd be called from, New York or wherever. How do you deal with that?
So, look, at the end of the day, it's your personal responsibility. The saying is, you give something to a busy person, they'll get it done. I think all of us who want to get things done, we have the propensity to take on more and more tasks. So there is a personal responsibility to figure out, what can I do? And if I'm going to take on another task, what do I stop doing? I don't think we're very good at that. And so at Microsoft, it really comes back to impact. I could do 1,000 different things. But if those things don't align with the impact that I need to make, then I need to think very carefully about whether I do those. So, in regards to, I could be accessing emails sometimes on Yammer at 11 o'clock because at night, because I have a good idea then, but it's certainly not a requirement. It is absolutely up to the individual, and there are times when, I've got to take my daughter for day surgery. I'm not in on that day. That's fine, but I might check in later. So it is about that personal responsibility.
But what about you, Kim, the Premier? What do you say? No?
On a Sunday?
He's a very flexible person.
He's very flexible, good.
So, look, I think I've thought a lot about this sort of stuff because I think our life changes throughout our careers, and therefore what becomes work-life balance is changing. So, for instance, I used to work, before we had children, I've only got one daughter, she's 22. Before we had children, both my wife and I worked professionally, different organisations, and I worked in Canberra. So I was working in the Senate, and my wife was here in Adelaide, so I did a lot of commuting. Absolutely worked fine, you know. We were married for about 5 years. It only felt like 12 months. It was great, you know. It was great. It worked really well. Flexible work arrangements.
Oh dear.
Worked really well. And then my wife got pregnant, and I realised that we had to move out of our one-bedroom apartment and get a house. So we found a house, and there was a by-election on in New South Wales, which I was working on over the 2-week period when my wife was due to give birth, which just happened to be when we finally bought the house, and she moved house holeless bowlers by herself, and then a week later gave birth. And I suddenly realised in Canberra, I don't think this is going to work. So I changed the way I went about things. I came back to Adelaide and I thought, what can I do? Because she wanted to go back to the ABC, where she had a good career trajectory. And I didn't. I thought, I've got to do something. So I quit Parliament and I came back here, and I thought, well, I'll set up my own business and consultancy and work from home, and that way I can be dad. So I did that for about 6 years until, our child was old enough to, work and go down the mines and all that sort of stuff at 6, that type of thing. And then I moved into corporate work and did stuff like that. So life has changed over time. Now, she's 22, she lives on another house, she's got her own life. My wife's doing other things, and I'm here. Now I can work 60 hours a week if that's what it takes, and I don't mind that. But, within that framework, I choose to do things differently. So I like to start early because I want to preserve the evenings for my wife. So I'm the guy that gets up at 4:30 in the morning, in my pyjamas, makes coffee, gets the iPad out, and I start sending emails to my staff. Hopefully they're not offended. But it's just kind of dealing with things, and I do all my pre-reads and cabinet work, and I do all of that by about 7 o'clock, 7:30, have a quick shower. I live in the city, so it's a 15-minute walk to work. And I get here, 7:30, 7:45, and I've done 2 or 3 hours, and it feels great. And what it means is, come 5:36, I can leave, and I feel good about that. And I go home and I can have family time. And so I think each of us have to evolve and develop at different times in our lives and choose to shape our careers. Now, what I would like to think is I've got a workplace where me and our management team recognise that is a need for people. So we should accommodate that as best we can. But as Eva said earlier, you've also got to it's got to work for both organisations. It's got to work for the organisation and the individual. And I think there's no problems with trying to find the right balance, and it's not one size fits all. So, there's a lot that can be done.
Yeah. No, you make a really good point about life cycles and adaptability. Another question over here. Please put up your hand so I can pick you for the next question.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Hoskin from Department of State Development. I'm very lucky because I've had great employers, Department of Premier and Cabinet in Arts SA, and now with DSD with work-life balance. Recently I've read the Annabelle Crabb's The Wife Drought, which everyone should read. Anyone who wants to have a career needs to have a good wife. Doesn't necessarily need to be a woman and doesn't necessarily need to be a man. But what was really interesting was her research that she did and how she talked about how men actually felt the women, it was quite easy to have that conversation to talk about work-life balance and needs to look after children. But when it came to men, they had a problem. Even if they had the confidence to do that, they were experiencing prejudices from their employer about why would you want to take your child to sport? Why would you want to take on the childcare? So how can we, as senior managers and within the public sector, change that attitude to really encourage men to have that discussion? Because Annabelle's point, one of her key points of her book, is we need to question the traditional patriarchal structure of a society and who takes the role and the lead in care and for both children and aged.
How about we start with you, Delly, and certainly Darren touched on his personal experience as a father and responsibility. So how do you do that for your staff?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because sometimes those expectations can come from a cultural point of view. But look, I think it's about, I know what I've done for the State Valuation Office. I could say probably 2 years ago, my staff were almost afraid to say, oh, I'm taking my son to the doctors or so forth. They'd make up something. But I'm really pleased to say that that just doesn't occur anymore, you know, men and women. As I said before, this is not a women's issue, it's men and women. And as far as the SVO is concerned, the take-up is not just with men, as Darren, it's also with men. So today, when one of my guys wants to take 3 hours off to, you know, go and, you know, take his son to whatever, that's exactly what he says in the workplace. And I'm very proud of that, to be honest. Because it has created a far more relaxed, honest and trusting environment. And that's what I talk about when I said the satisfaction that I have received, because there's many spin-offs to this initiative. It's not just about the numbers and productivity, it's all those other things and all those other benefits around work-life balance.
So how do we see breaking down those stereotypes? So Kim, how many public servants, you've shared your story about what you've done with your daughter. How do we make sure those stereotypes are there? How do we create that permission for both men and women, you know, Irma and Kim as leaders of the public sector?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I kind of look at wherever I work, I like data, so I always spend a lot of time looking at stuff. And a simple approach to get a profile of any organisation is to look at the demographic breakdown. You know, the public sector it's a conundrum, paradox perhaps. Public sector is overwhelmingly dominated by women in the workforce, not necessarily in certain agencies. So there are exceptions to that general rule across agencies. And yet at a senior management level, it's still dominated by men. Now, I don't reckon you have to be a Rhodes Scholar to work out there's something wrong with that picture. There's something wrong with it. You know, I always reckon an organisation or a business, wherever you are, runs best when it reflects the way your society is constructed. You know, our society has a more or less equal balance between genders. There should be, you know, our laws talk about equal opportunities, certain principles are guaranteed. Then, so why is that not reflected at the senior levels of leadership in places? So I think you just have to, like, you know, and to take Annabelle Crabb's point about, you know, the issues with men, I think it's true. Men need to get over it, you know. These are old systems that were designed as command and control systems. You know, these structures were largely put in place when the workforce was made up of largely blue-collar people or semi-skilled people. And you had to go to a place to, you know, pick up this tool to hit that thing to produce that output. And that had to be ticked off. And, you know, it's a production line. Well, we're not a production line. This society is completely different. We're moving more and more into the digital space. We've got the flexibility to work anywhere, anytime. And I think our leaders need to understand that and get with the program real quick. Otherwise, their organisations will be the ones that end up dragging the chain. And as accountability becomes sharper focus, their jobs will be on the line. Their careers will be questioned. And eventually you just go, see you later. You know, I've got people over here who'd rather do it differently. So I think it's, you know, you can't compel people sometimes, but if you put in place the framework and you give them the capacities and the tools and the ability and the permission, you know, you've given them everything you can give them. At the end of the day, if certain people don't want to do it, well, I reckon, you know, the one thing you own is your labour, and you can choose to employ it here. We can help you find somewhere else to employ it. I mean, I think it's as brutal as that sometimes.
Okay, I've got another question, but any other panellists on that?
I just want to make a point,
something.
I guess, on unconscious bias here. I totally agree with Kim, but what we have is an institution that actually has been built on probably white Anglo-Saxon males, and the way we describe jobs is the way they're still described, and the preference for maybe technical ability and exclusion, I think, of certain people unconsciously. Because in fact, if our workforce is, and it's half, it's 50% or 48, or in fact there's more women, as Kim said, then it actually doesn't make sense in terms of why we don't have either women, men from different cultural backgrounds. So there is something in the system, because they've been there long enough to be able to get through the system to become those leaders. And I think that I totally agree with Kim. We've got to actually put a sharper focus to it. But those of you that know me know that I feel really, really strongly about the unconscious bias that occurs when you get to this process, because why isn't it that we have 50% women at these senior roles?
Anyone else? Another question down the back, and please, anyone else, please show your hand.
Hi, I'm Chris Lewis, DPC. Being from the public sector, I guess I'm taking a bit of a different take on this. Cultural change has always been one of the things that is obviously the hardest, and not just in the public sector but private as well. And knowing how embedded our culture is in the public sector, this is quite a shift, what we're talking about, and to get to where we would like to be, I recognise quite clearly that those frameworks and those planning and all of that needs to really be in place. You need to be very aware of how you're going to help that shift occur. Coming to the question around that is, and in the cases where it's perhaps Delphina might want to ask this, in your planning, did you actually consider also the work health and safety sides of things as well, where you may have existing staff that in their current environment sit on a specific chair because it's been ergonomically designed and they've been assessed and they need that chair to be able to perform their duties without doing themselves any harm or damage within the workspace. So it's that actual safe workspace side of things as well, because when I see whole floors changing and you don't see those special chairs anywhere, it makes me wonder whether those considerations are taken into place carefully enough as well to adopt for those people as well.
Yes, those considerations definitely have to be considered, and in fact those that do work from home, we do undertake quite regular inspections of their home. There is a checklist that we do use to ensure that we comply by the legislation. In terms of my success, I have to say you have to take your staff along on the journey. It just wasn't one day I decided to implement an initiative. I came into an organisation where the culture was very toxic, it was embedded, it was run by middle-aged men. This is the way it was done and this is the way it's going to be.
Intended.
Sorry. Surprise. So, in a strange way, I mean, I knew that I had to take my staff on a journey, and it became almost like a healing process. And any negativity that I did receive, and I did receive quite a lot, I just captured that negativity and I used it in a positive way, and I just continuously, the message was always out there to all my staff, demonstrating the benefits until they gave up, really. Perhaps Darren can comment on that.
Surprisingly, at the beginning of the year, I came into an organisation that was run by middle-aged men too. We changed that.
Sorry, I don't mean to be...
You might have to do some makeup with the older men and the more experienced men in the audience.
Right.
But how did Microsoft deal with work health and safety?
I think the comment about cultural change is really important. Even if you don't work on your culture, you have a culture.
That's right.
So even if you don't do anything, you'll have something there, and that something are the behavioural norms. They're the practices that people perceive as being, appropriate and normal. And we spend a lot of time internally, really unpacking and being very explicit. What are the cultural norms we want to see in our organisation? And so we had a program when new employees joined Microsoft. They go through a training and they understand what are the values of the organisation. How do we give feedback to each other? How do we learn? And so being very, very focused around what's the culture we want to develop, a place where people are comfortable with saying, look, I've got a question, I'm not comfortable with that, help me understand. And so through that way you can actually address a lot of things. Look, I'll be honest, people didn't get on the bus. People chose to leave the bus and they went somewhere else. And that's fine, everyone's got a choice. But the people who stayed on the bus have said, look, this is the vision, that's what we're working towards. You've all been really explicit, what's the vision for the public sector? This is where we want to go. How do we want to work together to get there? So I think that explicit action is really important.
I see another question over here, if we can go to you.
I stand in defence of middle-aged men.
Good on you. We value our whole population.
Anyway. Leadership and culture, particular passions for myself. My name is Mark Searle, I'm former CEO of the City of Marion and currently the acting CEO for LGA. And I want to pick up this issue of leadership and data. I am very, very passionate around data. I love data, and I believe that you can apply data very strongly to leadership. And I've had experience using a system that's currently used by all the top 10 US companies, Fortune 500 companies, 46 or 48 of the top 50, and 380 of the Fortune 500 companies in the US. So I'm just interested in how the state public service is grappling with getting some empirical measurement behind the leadership, because ultimately leaders determine culture and culture determines performance. And we can talk about symptoms, but the root cause of all this is the leadership proposition that we actually provide, us middle-aged men and anybody else who's around. So I'm just interested in how you're wrestling that measurement of leadership in some sort of benchmark, empirical way as the public sector and also beyond the public sector.
Perhaps we start with you, Emma, but I know Kim's a data freak as well, so...
You were talking about the human synergistics, Mark? Yeah, so I'm familiar with that. Look, I have to say it is probably the fundamental, and Kim's heard me speak about this, it is front and centre, as Tammy sits here, in terms of what I think needs to happen in the public service. I have a desire to have what I think is sort of a leadership centre, where we look at, I guess, what it means to be the best public administrator. And that means the element of your culture and people, and then setting that benchmark and that standard, and then holding people to account for it. So I've been in the role for a short time, and I started by actually issuing the Code of Ethics. And that was very deliberate, because I think as a Commissioner for Public Sector Employment, the holder of the Act, I wanted to say, here's the platform. Here's what we actually will accept in terms of values and behaviours. Now we're going to hold you to account. And that's the journey that we're actually on at the moment. And that is not just the top. We start with the top, but it's at every level. And then, of course, what do you use? What tools do you use to actually measure that? So I'm thinking a whole of public service survey in some form. But the first thing is we've got to get people comfortable with feedback. We've actually got to get people comfortable understanding how they even assess culture. So the question I'd ask the group here, your culture is how you feel when you go in that organisation. That is the culture. How do you feel when you're in there? What does it feel like when you're in there? You're happy? Do you feel motivated? That is the culture. And I guess the only thing that we need to do is actually say, we're defining the culture as this, here are the values and behaviours, and your very good people will leave if they're not feeling good about that. But we all contribute to that culture. So absolutely agree with you, Mark. And that is, I guess, the legacy that I'd actually like to leave the public service as the Commissioner.
Anyone else want to comment on data? And
Look, I would say that, talking about culture and the data that perhaps could be used to help underpin decision making and people, we could spend all day here talking about that sort of stuff. When I first came into this role, I'd get all these dockets that would come to me, go through, read a blurb, expected to sign off. Lots of times, this is stuff going up to the Premier, I'd ask the question, so what evidence do we have to support this? And I was just constantly surprised in the first couple of months. Virtually no evidence. People were saying, well, this is what we think. Well, great. I mean, we all think something. I mean, I could turn on the radio and hear opinion all day long, but I don't know if it's fact. I need some evidence for it. So there's massive amounts of data that's collected across government, absolutely mountains of it, but it's by no means is it used well. And there are parts of government where data is actually consolidated, analysed and used particularly well. Treasury do a good job on data, and people give Treasury a hard time. But, I'll tell you what, I'd take a Treasury opinion any day over practically any other agency, because I know that theirs is going to be underpinned by real evidence and data, and I can go in, and if I disagree, I can argue about it because I can analyse the data, as opposed to going to places where you can't. So I think, you've got to have that sort of stuff. We are changing it. We are changing in DPC, becoming much more data-driven, but it does inform your decision-making. And once you start getting into an evidentiary-based system, you watch the culture start to change as people start to get a taste for it. They go, actually, I've got a better prospect of getting something through if I can actually prove it. And they become more motivated, they want to go and search it, they become better at their job doing it. The ones that just keep denying data, well, their work's going to just keep being kicked back, and then eventually that starts to impact on their performance, and their limitations are exposed. So I think, having good data, good analytics and underpinning it for decision making is critical.
All right, last comment on data, because I know we've got another question at the back. So Eva, or do you both want to?
Well, I just want to say two significant changes in the culture for the SVO. First of all, I have to say with flexible working, the conversations that are now had between managers and staff, I would describe them as partnerships. That wasn't happening 2 or 3 years ago. It was very much them and us. They do want flexibility, but with flexibility comes accountability, and the staff are struggling with that because now they are accountable for their time. And as I say to them, and you're quite right, Kim, this is about protecting your position and your job. I cannot go to the Premier and say, please give me 2 more staff because based on trust, I need data. I need to demonstrate it. So it's part of protecting them, I think.
I'll just be very brief. So Microsoft is a data-driven company. I made the statement before that we're looking to hire 5,000 people on the spectrum. I'd actually go so far, just between us in the room, I think our company was founded by people on the spectrum because it's all spreadsheets. Are people happy? Yes, the survey says so. It's in that spreadsheet. But on a very serious note, we are absolutely a data-driven company. For managers, for example, everyone has to complete MS Poll, Microsoft Poll. Every single employee is given the choice, it's not compulsory, to fill in a survey, and we answer questions about the workplace, about how we feel in the workplace, about our immediate team that we work with, about our immediate manager, about our management team. Do we understand the direction our company is going in? Do we believe in the direction of our organisation? What do we give feedback on? And then we break down that data by globally, by region, by sub-region, by division, by team. If the manager has, I think, 5 people or more, they get anonymised data. Less than that they don't, but they get verbatim comments. And that is how we pivot our organisation. Our senior leadership team sits down and evaluates that data and say, right, our people are saying this. How do we change? What do we change? And they're very, very open about that. So it can be used to great advantage in collecting data and then knowing how to use it properly.
So if you want to get something up and approved by Premier and Cabinet and you don't work in Treasury and Finance, get your data, because Treasury and Finance will beat you every day. You've heard it from Kim. Question down the back.
Hi, I guess I wanted to ask questions about a bit of a different angle from, there's an excellent focus around having flexible working arrangements because you're having a family, and sometimes we might look to Microsoft or Google for inspiration about how to be motivated to innovate. That was a ridiculous sentence, but innovation sometimes comes out of not just having the best talent, but that you're actually motivated to do that. And people have a lot of different reasons. If we are talking about the perceptions of men and women, most of the talk here is around women are the carers. Some women, I'm representative, don't have children, not having children. So in my experience, even where you've gone somewhere that's had the options, there really has been a focus around it's for people that are looking after children or perhaps caring for parents, etc. So I guess, do you think that the public service has will have permission or be able to provide flexible working arrangements for a variety of reasons, whether it be you want to go and work overseas to expand your horizons and come back and bring the best here of your work, when we do have like the public looking at us to say how are we best spending our money, because a private organisation, you know, they know what their bottom line is, what they're trying to achieve. They can spend in different ways, and sometimes flexible working arrangements can be perceived as frivolous or, you know, end up on Today Tonight because you're having time off because of your dog. You know, you want to, you know, go off and breed dogs or something for a while and come back. You know, that sounds ridiculous, but there's more scope than just reproducing.
Very good point. Who wants to start? I'm sure the Commissioner does.
Look, I absolutely agree with you. I think that we always default to caring and then say women. In fact, we're following that paradigm. The points I made earlier, I think about looking at workforce and even sort of industrial instruments and how we do our business, and then actually connecting with the citizens of South Australia can actually achieve both. And the innovation, I think, comes at making sure that everyone that wants that flexibility has the opportunity to sort of think about how they might do their bit of the business differently. So if you're actually on a counter at Services SA or whatever, is that the best way of actually doing it? And I'd often say that the person sitting there would have another idea about how it works. So innovation is about that group actually saying, if we use, let's say, the guys that are not retiring to cover our sort of heavy times, we can actually then not be stuck with these sort of these shifts that we've got. Or someone had mentioned rostered work, so police and others can't do it. There are lots of innovative ways, I think, that internationally and nationally and even locally where we could actually do it. The innovation, firstly, everyone gets the flexibility, and secondly, use the people that deliver the service along with the citizens and community to come up with another solution. And I think there's some generational changes coming because I know we've got different, and digital literacy comes into this. So we then offer things out, it gives us more flexibility. So I think this is an area where we can innovate and get new ideas. Absolutely you can do it. Is the organisation ready? Maybe not.
Others? Or other questions? Pardon?
To keep sane.
You need it to keep sane. I think we all do. Are there any other questions? Yes, one down here.
Yeah, retirement age, traditionally 65. People have been encouraged to work on several years longer. I believe work cover is restricted and limited to a certain extent. It is a decided barrier to older people like me, for example, continuing on in the workplace.
Does anyone want to comment on that? I can say, the new return to work legislation has been amended. So previously it referred to 65, and at post 65 you could get up to 2 years of benefits subject to blah, 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 and I'm not an expert. But it has been amended to say that no age limit is in there, but it aligns to the Commonwealth Government's policy around access to pensions, etc. So there might be a work cover expert in the audience who can help me out here. But it's a step forward. It is not the answer, but it does mean that at 65 you won't be cut off, but it aligns to the Commonwealth Government policy, so that might be 67 in future, and then you still only get 2 years of entitlement after that age, and it's not the full entitlement. We do have a lot more reform to still do in that, and people come to me at the Equal Opportunity Commission from the private sector and say, I can't get income protection insurance, I'm running a small business, I can't get this cover anymore, I'm 65 and I want to work for another 10 years. What are you going to do about it? And it's a real challenge for the insurance sector and return to work. But I can see someone else might want to make a comment. Is this a comment on return to work?
Yeah, if I could.
Do you want to add to that?
Mark Searle again. I heard some good data the other day, interesting data, and they've done research in the US on which age groups have the most successful startup companies.
I was just going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Any guesses on what age groups?
Probably 70 or 65.
70, 80 and 90-year-olds
That's right.
have a greater percentage success in new startups than any other age groups.
Clever people.
Can I just make a point? Letting the cat out of the bag, but we're talking with some people outside of government. This is around some of the innovation. And we've looking at the economic priority around basically the ageing and the contribution that older people and keeping them in the workforce or doing different things. I think South Australia has a massive opportunity around social enterprises where people actually can contribute all that wealth of experience that they've got. Mark and I have been talking about this, using councils as hubs where they can actually help mentor, coach other people. Often it's not necessarily money, but I reckon they could make a lot of money out of it. And they're giving back to the community. So when I talked about innovation and workforce and what we do, we're a big employer. Let's not think about our workforce leaving at 65. Let's think about what we do to transition our workforce into providing those sorts of opportunities for people that are less fortunate than ourselves. So I'd just like to leave it to the group to actually say, what can we do? And let's challenge the system. Let's see what sort of industrial instruments we can create to allow this to occur and not think about retirement.
I think, Kim?
One of the interesting pieces of info, stats that I'd seen, in Australia anyway, is that because of problems, the more traditional structures of our workforce, and where careers are often interrupted for women due to childbearing or whatever it might be, what we end up with is the overwhelming majority of small business starts are done by women, not by men. And the average age when they do this is around 50. And there's whatever reasons, glass ceilings, career interruptions, whatever it be. But what it actually means in Australia is that the women are the innovators and they're the risk takers. Men are conservative and prefer stability. Now, you can always find exceptions to that general rule, but to make a point, as a generalisation, the figures actually are quite clear and support that sort of stuff. But in terms of working, I mean, I in my own mind, I'll be 59 the next birthday, and I've got no intention of, I've got no idea what I'll do and where I'll work and how long I work. But I know one thing, my next venture, I'm going to open a bar. Because the legislation in Adelaide is very good for that, very flexible. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open a bar. So watch this space.
It is, and good on you. And it is a really serious issue. And just to add to that, from the commissioners for anti-discrimination commissioners around Australia, through Susan Ryan, the Age Discrimination Commissioner, is working with the Insurance Council to try and get some of those policies addressed, and the wave of demand needs to come from the population. It really does. And if you're interested, she's actually got an inquiry open now called Willing to Work, and it's focused on both mature age employment as well as people with disability and increasing the employment of them. So you can submit to those inquiries, and the people need to demand a change to the return to work legislation and insurance laws to enable people to work longer. And when you're out there in your bar and you find you can't get insurance, you'll be there, Kim, knocking on the door.
Pulling beers.
Is there another question? We've got a couple more minutes for. There's one here and one down the back. So I'll go to the back first because he's got the mic. And one down here, please.
Thanks. There was a dot point in one of Delhi's slides, which is hard to walk past, and that's that as men rise in seniority, their wellbeing increases, and as women's rise in seniority, their wellbeing decreases. And other people might describe that as men entering a club and women being excluded from a club, and all of the rules that are associated with that. So I was thinking, and while we may not want to go into a command and control structure, as Kim was talking about, is there any room in an executive agreement to look at the existence of flexible workplaces being put in place, given the evidence that it addresses issues like this for men and women?
It's there. I've got Tim, you've still got those arrangements in your executive contract. So in fact, the South Australian Executive Service contract has those arrangements. And I know I mentioned the job share. That was probably the first time I think we made that quite explicit. And Tim, who's here in the sort of frontish row, was one of my first male executives who actually did put that into his contract and actually helped balance, still does, the raising of the children. The concern I have, so it's there, and we've made it explicit. The concern I have, it isn't part of, and this is about the dialogue that leaders have. So a lot of executives don't put it in, because I think that what we're modelling here is that to be at that level would be, quite impossible to manage that sort of flexibility. So there isn't, if you look at the top right now, there isn't many people that have got that explicitly in their contract. And I think that needs to change so people can see that, yes, I can get there and I can actually be very explicit about those flexible work arrangements. And I have to say there are more women that would put it in to their executive contracts than there would be men because of sort of those institutional arrangements. So it's not about having the ability to do it, it's actually the culture that we've got still, I think, to actually have that conversation at that very, very senior level.
Anyone else? Because I've got one more question, which I think is our last question. So I'll go to that question now. Thank you.
Hi, John McInnes from DCSI. My department's had lots of good ideas, innovations that I think would transpose very well across the public service. But there seems to be a great difficulty in actually doing that, and actually sort of saying, here is something that I think that could, go across departments. Seems to me that the public service still is, a bunch of silos. This department is this department is over here, and never the twain will meet. They won't share. I think we've really, really got to break that down and look at it, as Kim has noted, that it's the whole of a workforce. It's the whole of the public service, and we should be looking at it as what is good for the whole of the public service. I'd just like some comment from you.
Well, lots of nods. Who wants to go first?
Look, I'll jump in. I think it's a problem that exists everywhere, not just in the public sector. If I take something as simple as brand, you talk about, we work for one government. We're all part of the South Australian government, those of you who are public service employees. And yet within it, there's multiple brands, there's different identities. Even in DPC, there are people who don't understand that they actually work for DPC, they work for a service outlet. And they see it that way, they don't see any connection. So there's issues like that. But equally, when I worked out in the private sector, you know, we had exactly the same problems across a global organisation where, you know, culturally, countries were different, spoke different languages, just didn't feel as though they were part of the home team at all. And it takes a lot of effort and it takes time. You know, I think that cultural change is a very long journey and it's a time-consuming thing, and you can't force it on people. You actually have to get people to want to be on the journey and get with you and sort of join in that. And everyone will do that differently, and it all happens at different paces. But I agree with you, John. I think it's absolutely the case that we're still siloed as an organisation, but there are definitely areas that I've seen in the 6 or 7 months I've been here where that is changing and it's starting to break down. And for me, I can deal with other CEs a lot, so you forge different relationships, you put different ideas before them, and you can clearly see there'll be CEs who go, actually I quite like that, we'll do that. And they begin a journey as well, and you start to build those alliances and it spreads, and then you hope it goes to their next level and that they start to engage their people, and it will change over time. But you know, it's not a cultural revolution, but it's a bit glacial at times. I find the place a bit glacial, but you know, in terms of not being cold, but how slowly things move. Very warm-hearted people, really. But things move very slowly, and I think we have to, you know, somewhere between the revolution and the glacier, we've got to find a middle distance that we can all move together on.
A plug actually for SA Government for some of the great stuff you've done, and this is a long time ago now. I don't know if you appreciate that as SA Government you have one single email exchange. That means all of you, doesn't matter what agency you sit in, you can actually make appointments with each other. No other state government has that capability. You know, communities can't see if anyone in Treasury is available. You know, correctional services can't see if anyone from courts is available. You actually have that capability. So while there's a lot to work on, you actually have a fantastic foundation. The work that, you know, is happening within DPC and ODG to facilitate that cross-agency collaboration. It's there and it's available. So please speak to ODG or ask about how you can make that happen for your agency. But it's there, the building blocks are there.
We're almost out of time. Did you want to comment at all on collaboration as the Commissioner, Irma?
Well, you know the things that we've tried to do with our Change at SA and the projects that happen here. The challenge, I guess, to everyone in this room is that it would start with us. So in fact, if you feel that you need to talk to other people, then you go ahead and collaborate and innovate with your partners. I think it starts with us. And that's how it happens. We can start our own movements within our own areas and actually collaborate.
And I think some of the projects, the project I led was a cross-government project and the collaboration was there. Some elements of surprise about, oh, I didn't know you were doing that. So we have to keep doing that and we have to persist at it because you have waves of success. Eva's given us an example, but sometimes we fall backwards on that collaboration because it's a big beast, the public service. But please join me in thanking our panellists. Thank you.